Surprise, we are back with Pen Night Radio. Pen Night Radio is proud to bring you Drop a Line, 60-minute interviews with authors, artists, and indie creatives from all around the world. These are the stories behind the stories. And before we bring in our next guest, I would just like to say a few words. Andrew Bast has been the Chief Operating Officer of One True Promotion. What that means is that he assures that everything behind the scenes is running as smoothly as it possibly can. And he is responsible for all the event planning and basically a lot of the team management that goes on behind the scenes. There's not a whole lot of glory in being a chief operating officer from the sense of being on camera, being celebrated publicly. Really, it's a very behind the scenes position. But Andrew has performed honorably and dutifully and has brought One True Promotion very far to where it needs to be. And he has published Dirge of the Trinity, the sequel to Sanguinary Song. So I am very, very excited to bring you Mr. Andrew Bast. What's up?
What's up, Alec?
How you doing, buddy? Good to see you.
I'm good. I'm currently fighting technology. My
Really?
TV has decided that it keeps wanting to turn itself on. So I'm not sure if it's trying to get inside the interview here at Pen Night Radio, but it's really trying.
Demons.
I've had to shut it off at least 3 times in the past 5 minutes.
Demons.
So
This was my entire previous week, last week. I would turn off the DVD player and the PlayStation would come on. I would turn off the PlayStation and the DVD player would come on. And I'm over here like, listen, I didn't give neither of y'all permission to come back on. What's the deal? It's crazy. It's crazy. This smart technology is really making me feel dumb.
yeah, it's insane. You would think by this point that we would have it figured out, but no, technology is still one step ahead of us.
It really is. So, Andrew, my friend, I am so proud of you, man. You have had a remarkable week. Can you tell us a little bit about what's been going on?
Yeah, so I published Dirge of the Trinity, book 2 in the Sanguinary series, a spellbinding sequel to the Sanguinary series of magical YA novels. Follows Daniela McNally, and she's out for revenge after the events of book 1 of the Sanguinary series. And it's just been an unreal past few days. It has been really anxious leading up to it, but now that it's out and it's been out for a few days, I got to breathe a collective sigh of relief. I got to work on new projects, which is really exciting. And it's just been overall fun.
I really want to just dive right into things. Why is it so stressful before that sigh of relief? Like, what is it that we write? Because I felt the same way with Children of Arc. What is it, in your opinion, that we writers really grapple with leading up to that moment we hit publish?
Well, there's so much that can go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's first and foremost what it is. Doesn't matter how prepared you are. You could be the most prepared person in the world and something will go wrong. You can find something at any point in time up until it's published. I mean, even after it's published, you can still find stuff. But you're so worried about it being the perfect launch and it going completely as planned that up until it actually releases and everything's fine, it's just anxiety will eat at you until that moment comes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I went into Children of Arc after I drafted it in 2019. I went into that process telling myself it was going to be 2 years. And there's even some old promotional art that Cameron did that says 2021. Now, you, of all people, know exactly how the rest of that story went. But literally, it turned into a 4-year struggle to get that thing out. And throughout the entire process, I was stressed out. The entirety of the process. I was stressed when I was trying to put it out. Did your TV turn back on?
Oh yeah, I tried to turn itself back on, and I quickly turned it off again.
I don't know who you are, Demon, but we are not having you on the show tonight. So please just go on back to hell now, and we will continue our conversation. Andrew, the 4 years building up to Children of Arc, it's exactly as you said. There's so much that can go wrong. And did this begin mainly at the production process, or was it also like a struggle at the editing and beta process for you, like it was for me?
I think at first it was a beta issue. I think my first draft was the hardest, and I think when I sent it first to Brielle for her to look at, she only got about, I want to say 120 pages in. It wasn't that long before she stopped, and she was just like I could tell you're frustrated, and I was. Daniela, for me, her perspectives, she's supposed to be the main character, and at this point, I get 121 page. I finished the whole draft, but she gets 120 pages in. She's like, "Yeah, no kidding, you're struggling." And the big part of it was that I couldn't find Daniela's voice again,
Mhm.
and up until this point, Daniela was not a main character in terms of POV. So at this point, I had perspectives from Alaric, I had perspectives from Christina, and I had perspectives from Frederick. So like Daniela really wasn't a main player for me to get into her head until book 2.
Yeah. I created the character of Richard Renovon for Children of Arc in 2011, as you know. And it was shocking to me that I struggled so much to find his voice. When we can't quite, speak through the character, because we kind of, both of us, I think, do a close third person sort of thing. What is it for you that drives, like, what is it for you that creates this problem? Like, where do you think what do you think the roots of that problem are? And how does it grow into, I can't find the character?
I think it has to do with personal experience. Christina is more like me than anybody else in terms of her character, her inner thoughts. Daniela is more or less like, she's kind of like um
Free spirited.
yeah, free spirited. She's
Hmm.
very sarcastic,
Hmm.
I'm not. So I think as I was writing her, I was kind of writing like Christina in a sense, and it became very clear early on that it was like, this is not the Danielle that you had in book 1. And it's like,
Yes.
it's okay that she could be a little bit different, because after the events of book 1, yes, there's going to be some traumatic changes to her
Yep.
character, but that doesn't change her voice.
Hmm.
And that's really what I was trying to work with. So I really had to sit down and remember, like, this is what Daniela sounds like. This is the type of person that Daniela is. Now that I know that this is the type of person that Daniela is, how does that person connect with the trauma that she just endured in book 1?
And that's no joke. That is a challenge for an author, because you're talking about a three-part process there. You're talking about taking a supporting protagonist from book 1 and making them the main character, first of all. Then you're talking about fundamentally changing their character by putting them in a position where they don't want to be sarcastic, they don't want to be sassy. They're kind of just depressed and miserable and grieving. And then the third part is you're trying to make a connection between these two sides of her mind. That is quite a heavy load for any author, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things where you just got to go through it, and if that's part what the story entails, you got to learn how to adapt to that. And sometimes it takes a lot longer than you expect. For me, it did. It's like, after first draft, I really had to go back and find the voice, and when I did, it clicked and it all fell into place.
You and I have been friends for a very long time. Freshman year of high school. We could talk about that a bit later. But we have been basically dreaming about doing this since we were kids, and all we had was our notebooks. And you were talented then, But you have, like, when I open up Dirge of the Trinity, and when you, audience, open up Dirge of the Trinity, you have transformed so much as a creator, as a storyteller. You know, you've become someone who really knows how to tell a story. Like, listening to you talk about that just now, I really feel like, and I'm going to ask you if you agree with this, I feel like part of the reason you excel so much is because when you write a book, you always take on big challenges like that.
Yeah, yeah. Whether it's a 365-day challenge or um, giving it the alien treatment, so to speak. And that's what this was. I mean, I always talk, and I have talked in the past about um, how I love the Alien franchise, how the first and second Alien movies are my absolute favorite. And what I did was I wanted the first and second book to be similar but different. And what that means is when I looked at Alien, Alien was survival horror, where Aliens number two was more of like an action horror. And both of them were equally loved by the fan base, but the second book was always the runaway favorite because of the actors involved, because of the action, because of the elements of horror that were retained. Um, it was just bigger and badder, and that's what I wanted Dirge of the Trinity to be, bigger and badder. So I like gave it the alien treatment. I said, okay, how do I make this similar but different? And
Mhm.
where book one was concerned, I think book one, I experimented with multiple genres. If you read the first part of Sanguinary
Sure
Song,
did.
it reads like a horror. If you read the middle part of the book, it reads like an anime action. If you read the end of the book, it goes back to like a sense of horror
Yep.
and a
Sure
drama.
does.
So it's like I experimented with different um genres in book one that kind of find my footing. And in book two, I have a consistent storytelling going.
Mhm.
I tell the story of two perspectives, and those perspectives converge. And not only do they converge, but I have an actual theme this time. And the theme that we go into is grief and pain and
Yep.
how to overcome it. So all of our characters here are dealing with some sort of trauma, how it related to the first book. And it's though that feeling that either gets them into trouble or helps them overcome their trauma.
I tell you, I love seeing those two books behind you together.
Oh
I
yeah,
really
yeah.
do. Isn't that
Sisters
isn't
reunited.
I mean, how does that feel? Like, tell us about it.
Well, it's fantastic. So both of these books look similar, but again are different, right?
Mhm.
So um, I got the idea while I was working in the library, and one of the things I always saw was that each trilogy or each series, they look similar, but they also had identifying markers of a series. So you got Sanguinary Song, and on the back, you just see Sanguinary Song, and I'm banging in my mic here, and my last name. And there's no number. That's my one regret. Like, if
Mhm.
I could put a number on this, I would.
Mhm.
And then you see Dirge of the Trinity, my name, and there's that number two.
There it is.
So, the big thing about this for me was I wanted to switch cover designers. Nothing wrong with my first cover designer, but I wanted to try Get Covers. And Get Covers was recommended to me by Christine Germain,
Mhm.
and they
Christine.
she's fantastic. She always shares information with me. But I did get covers, and I basically gave them this cover, and I said I want to do this cover, but with Daniela. And this is the cover that they provided, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Amazing.
And together they just look fantastic. I
Hmm.
gotta get used to this mic being here now because I'm
Yeah,
like banging into it, and
always takes time. I know. It's okay though. You're coming through loud and clear. Quentin Tarantino. He used to be one of my favorite filmmakers. Still is. I haven't watched his stuff in a while, but my favorite thing he ever made was Kill Bill. And as you
okay,
may know, Kill Bill, is cut into two different movies, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And I distinctly remember there was exponentially more action in Volume 1 than Volume 2. And he said in the behind the scenes that Volume 1 was designed to grab the audience's attention and blow them away with cool, action. And 2 was designed to really dig deeper into the story, into the origins behind all of this. And I remember thinking then that there was a lot of wisdom in that. And interestingly, you seem to have done the exact same thing in how you handled Sanguinary Song and Dirge of the Trinity.
Yeah, and it's all part of that method of madness. I was trying to not fall into the same pitfalls that so many sequels make, which you get to the sequel, you try to do too much, and it ends up ruining the series. Or like you look at the trilogy or the movie set, and they're like, "Well, I can point out that this was the worst," and it's like it's usually very obvious. But then you get franchises that actually were able to keep your attention throughout. And that was the goal with the Sanguinary series, was to just keep providing you with something more, which is why I had to have the theme, and I had to make it scaled to be more dramatic than the first. And I took a lot of risks with this novel, and you know it more than anybody else.
You sure
I
did.
would stress for hours on my decision for book 2 and where it goes, who the main antagonist is, why the main antagonist is there.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, because after book 1 and going through with Drake, you kind of want to see the conclusion there. And it's like, well, book 2 picks up with us going after Drake. But is Drake going to be the person that you're going to run across this whole time? Or is there somebody else waiting in the wings? And can that person top the can the person top what Drake did in book 1 and what Claudia did in book 1? Because let's give Claudia her flowers, right? Because Drake is considered to be the main antagonist of Sanguinary Song, but Claudia really takes that role for a good chunk of the book.
She does everything.
She does everything. So I mean, we got to give her flowers to that. So it's like you got to go from Claudia and Drake, and then you got to ask yourself, what's next?
That's right. What is next? And I mean, I'm trying to think of like a concrete example, but there have been, books and movies that picked up right where the previous left off, and it was like that for a couple of chapters. But then all of a sudden, it just launches into this new thing that is consistent till the end of the book. And I distinctly remember thinking, wow, I never saw any of this coming. And it's so good.
Yeah. Yeah. You really think that you know what's going to happen, and then it just flip a switch. And a lot of it is based off of that grief and that trauma. It's that idea that sometimes, remember Telltale?
I sure do. I'm still mad about that.
Well, the thing about Telltale is they would always give you a warning at the beginning of the game. They would tell you about your choices and how it affects your gameplay going forward. And there was one thing that each Telltale would always do, and they would give you this option, but almost nobody uses it. And they would say, sometimes it's better to not say anything at all.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, for those of you that don't know, Telltale Games is a video game, was an independently created video game series that involved playing out scenes in a story with no less than 4 responses to every situation. And it was a highly, what's the word I'm looking for here? Malleable choose your own adventure, where you could get any number of endings based on just what you would do if you were that character playing out that scene. And I became obsessed with them. Andrew, I know you were a fan too. And yeah, they really liked to go fringe with that series, didn't they? Where they're like, oh, don't choose this option.
Yeah. And just to bring it back, it's just like when you're asking yourself, why does this story go in the direction it does? Well, it's because the character decided to do something.
Yep.
As opposed to not doing something.
That's
So,
right.
that's the beauty of the story. It's wherever your characters take you.
I mean, one of my favorite chapters in Dirge of the Trinity. In fact, there's a lot of stuff at the end of Dirge, if I could tell people, that really has kind of cemented. There are a lot of scenes at the end of Dirge that have cemented themselves as my favorite scenes you've written, just for their level of imagery and description and the overall impact on the plot and story. I mean, it's all, you guys got to read this book. It's a great book. But I can remember there was a point earlier in the book where me as a reader, I realized we were headed in that direction. And for me, it is a scene that involves a humble little crow. I'll just say that. There's a little crow that comes to visit Daniela. And my goodness, like, when you how does this connect? When you get to that scene in the book, you can just sense that the decisions that the characters are making are now bringing us into a new adventure with higher stakes. And that is actually, in my opinion, based on all the sequels I've seen, because you and I have binged a lot in our lives, right? So we know sequels. To me, that's the importance of a sequel, is that if it does nothing else, it absolutely has to raise the stakes.
Yeah, and it's hard to do sometimes because um, I feel like some people tend to go bigger
Hmm.
early on, and then it's like they decide that they want to keep going, but it's really hard to top that.
Yeah.
So it's like we're dealing with one really bad supernatural creature, actually two,
Hmm.
and you got to ask yourself, well, how do you go beyond that? And um, you kind of got a little bit of experience with that in book one, to where they kind of explain something particularly important. And if you're paying attention to it, you could see why it scales into this direction going into book two, because you start to see a power scale similar to Dragon Ball Z, right? And
Hmm.
that's where we get it from our old TV shows.
Oh, sure
It's
do.
like, you know, you're going to start to get the sort of power level of each character and
Mhm.
how they equate to these things that they're coming up against. And it's something that Christina ran into fairly early in the book one. She's been fighting these supernatural creatures as humans, and there becomes a realization to her where she understands that she needs to start fighting as a supernatural and not as a human. And she needs to go and find a weapon that is equal to that of a supernatural creature.
It's I'm so happy you said that, because you finally reminded me earlier what the specific example I was looking for was. I was actually when I said that sometimes a story picks up right where it left off, but then it surprises you with where it's going. I was actually thinking of the Android Saga from Dragon Ball Z, because our boy Cell doesn't show up until the end of the whole first season of that arc. And it's like, wow. Like, that season opens with the previous villain returning and a mysterious stranger showing up with a cryptic message. And it's like, in those first few episodes, as a Dragon Ball fan, you're watching this, you think you know where this is going. And then by midway through, you're like, wow.
Well, I don't think anybody could have had that on their bingo card, right?
Yeah.
With the way that they kind of set that up, and they really wanted to throw you for a loop. And again, in that story too, the consequences actually bred something far worse.
Oh,
So
yeah.
Trunks interfering actually made the androids worse. And not
Yep.
only did it make the androids worse, now you got Cell coming around.
Yeah, he stole the time machine. He came right back. It's like, this is what happens when you create a time machine, people.
Yeah, I mean, and it's been done before, but it's the matter in which you pay attention to what works and what doesn't. And it's like sometimes the answer is better left unsaid. Sometimes you shouldn't say anything at all.
That's right. Oh man, I love that we were able to make that connection. Dude, I love your book. Literally, like, I'm not just saying that because I know you. I've always given you, straight feedback. I've always said, I think these are the strengths and these are the weaknesses. This is the that, the da, the da. Dude, I absolutely adored this book. Like, literally, I think about it all the time. You have written a book that I'm always thinking about, having not even read it in a while. Like I'm always flashing back, like, oh, I love that moment when this character did this. Oh, I remember this line of dialogue. Oh, I remember this image. Like I was actually writing my own book the other day, my own book. And I've been telling you in text messages, you're taking me to school, right? I'm not just flattering you. I'm writing my own book and I'm thinking about a particular scene towards the end when you were playing with some very shocking imagery. And I'm looking at my own imagery and I'm like, is there enough detail here? Like got to capture the right amount of detail. I think of Dirge of the Trinity when I am confronted with these problems in writing. So I just want to tell you, man, you have created something extraordinary, and I'm
I
saying it on
appreciate it.
record.
I still think that Dirge of the Trinity it is a fantastic book. I think that it's going to stand the test of time. I honestly hope that it is considered one of the best books that I will ever write. I mean, not that I, don't want to write anything better than it, but I
Mhm,
think it's one of those things where the content is especially interesting to me. And,
mhm,
a lot of people will, for example, go back and say, hey, I really liked Prisoner of Azkaban. Prisoner of Azkaban
mhm.
is my favorite Harry Potter book.
That's
I
right.
kind of want people to say that about Dirge of the Trinity. Like, oh man, I really liked book two. Book two is
Mhm.
my favorite. I mean, like the rest of the series is awesome, but I really liked book two. And like that's how
Absolutely.
much energy and so much passion that I put into book two.
I mean, what is your favorite sequel of all time?
My favorite sequel.
For a lot of
Um,
people, it's Empire Strikes Back because that was a movie that took the original concept, which was stellar for a lot of people, which sold out movie theaters, but they didn't just rehash the same thing. They took it, like we've been saying, in an interesting direction. And I would argue, of all the Star Wars films, that one has truly withstood the test of time, especially with that little thing that happened at the end there. So, I mean, there's a lot of power in a well executed sequel. Which one is your favorite?
it's so hard to say because like my go-to would be Lord of the Rings. And like
Mhm.
going from Fellowship
Helm's Deep.
to Two Towers and then to Return of the King. Um, but again, I have to always put out there Alien
That's
because
right.
um, like I would be lying if I said that this concept didn't originate from the Alien sequel. And that's all I was really thinking about in terms of what I wanted to do. So, um, as much as I would like to say Lord of the Rings, I probably have to say Alien.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know me, I was a wuss with horror movies all of our childhood. I didn't watch my first horror movie until I was 18. So Alien was just off my radar. And when you brought those two movies over that one summer and we sat and we watched them through, I was just totally, totally impressed with the first two films. Like having
Like you're
never been a
talking
fan.
about
Yeah.
1979 for the first one, and then you're talking about what is it, 90 or 80? No, 98. What I can't remember at this point. I'm gonna look it up.
I'm looking up right now. 86.
86. So you're talking
Yep.
about 79 and then 86.
Yeah. 7 years.
That's insane. Like
It
you're
is.
talking about a movie franchise that was made in the 70s and the 80s.
Hmm.
It's insane.
Well, I'm going to put another feather in your cap because, I think the two of us personally and everybody we've interacted with at One True Promotion are very creative as storytellers go and very passionate about giving our audiences our best at all times. I was watching the Rosenbaum podcast recently, Inside of You. Great podcast, by the way, everybody. And the topic of James Cameron came up. And James Cameron was quoted, I believe it was in the 80s, with a script for Avatar. And he told the guy, I'm waiting for the technology to catch up. Like, I'm waiting for the technology to catch up to me, to my vision. And artists are like that. Artists, like you are an artist that has serious vision. And yeah, like when I watch Aliens, I would imagine that the ideas were in their heads even before the technology was available, you know? But after the test of time, after a little bit of time, they were able to get out there and just make some magic.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the cool thing about um a lot of that um a lot of that technology. It's like you're talking about like 70s technology, and they're taking it into a futuristic perspective.
Mhm.
And it's like you look at what we're doing with Auto Realm, and it's like,
Yeah,
now it's like a modern, like cyberpunk type deal.
absolutely. I mean, this is just awesome. I'm excited for us, the whole team. I'm excited for you. I'm excited for fans of Sanguinary Song. Um, that they're finally going to be able to continue with the series. It's just awesome. These are exciting times. Um, you've mentioned grief a lot. So that's a theme in this book. So it just so happens that on Pen Night Radio tonight we were talking about killing off characters. I'm just going to start with a very base question. What was your um, what's one good reason to kill off a character? You could go all the way back to high school if you want.
Well, high school me would say killing off a character was based off of your mood. You were angry today, so you killed off a character. Why? Because you just needed to do it.
Just blowing off
And then
steam.
you got to go back and rewrite and be like, yeah, no, that can't happen because of your main character. Um,
Whoops.
I don't know, man. Like a good reason to kill your character. Well, I would say if it adds significant perspective to your plot, that's when you
Mm,
kill a character.
mm.
Not too many people would kill their main character, but it has been done before. Um, I know a few people who have killed their main character. I ain't gonna say anything about me because
Funny you say that.
but yeah, I think you take into perspective what you're going for in a
Mhm.
series and what themes you want to go for. And it's like if you're looking at tragedy and revenge and anger and hate, then death is a reasonable tool in order to drive those motivations.
Yeah, I mean, on TV, for instance, killing a character comes with ending a contract, you
Hmm.
know? Like you end up firing somebody. Just there's no way out of it. Unless you're doing, a show with ghosts. But and a lot of flashbacks. But the moments that stand out to me are the ones where um they'll kill off a popular character, not just somebody unpopular they want to get rid of to appease the audience, but someone that it's actually going to sting a little bit, but they're doing it for the story. An example that comes to mind, spoiler alert, is Boone from Lost.
Hmm.
Because I did another binge of that recently, as you know, and I loved the entire first season. That was 25 awesome episodes of television, and not a whole lot. There wasn't a whole lot of death in the very first season, but when he died, the story had become so fractured between Boone and Locke and then all the rest of the survivors. And when he went, it brought so many threads together. And I was watching that and I was like, this is ingenious. That was an ingenious call on the writer's part. Wow.
Hmm. Yeah, and you never know it's gonna work. You could kill somebody off and it could ruin your series. I mean,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
just gonna say it.
Oh, yeah.
You got to be very careful with what you do and how you do it. Um, like a good thing to keep in mind is you don't want to do the supernatural thing. Now, I'm not saying it's supernatural
Mhm.
didn't make money and they're
Oh,
not popular. Don't come at me, anybody. Okay, I'm not dogging on supernatural,
I
but
mean, I dogged on
supernatural
Supernatural.
Supernatural, spoiler alert, you had Dean and Sam both trading places, dying and coming back to life.
Oh,
And
man.
it made death meaningless in that
Yes.
world. It's like if you die, it's okay. We're just gonna come back and get you somehow.
Oh,
Um,
my Lord. It's
but I
so
mean,
meaningless.
you
Yeah.
gotta be so careful with what you do and why you do it. And when it comes to killing a character, it has to have that meaning behind it, and it has to have that after effect behind it.
Mhm. One of the funny debates we had recently, this was a Naruto discussion, was to your point, when I see a character die, I really want to feel it. So I don't want a whole flashback story about that character, or two or three in filler arcs long after they've already gone. Of course, if that character happens to be your favorite character, maybe you're not too broken up about that.
Yeah, I mean, like the only exception there is Itachi because everyone couldn't get enough of Itachi.
Yep.
But it's one of those things where again, you want to make sure that you're doing what's best for your story, and what's best for your story means killing a character. Make sure it has meaning. Make sure it drives the story going forward, and don't try to write the character back in unless it actually makes sense for the character to come back.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's right.
it's got to make sense. Like there's got to be some sort of story plot that actually makes sense for you to do that.
Absolutely. And it's like sometimes you watch these fantasy series, if it's got like Dracula in it or it's got werewolves in it, people say, "Oh, I pretty much stopped, taking the story seriously at the mention of vampires." And it's like, no, it still needs to make sense. So I'm going to ask you, how do you make, a very surreal mythology heavy story? Um, how do you give it rules? How do you make it make sense?
Well, you got to lay the law down, right?
Mhm.
You got to say that this is what I want my characters to do. This is what I want my characters to be able to do, and this is how they're going to be able to do it. So you need to have that solid rule set, that checklist of what you can and can't do, and you got to follow that line to a T. And you don't want to cross that exception unless you absolutely have to. And this is something that I could even say about Vampire Diaries. I adore
Oh.
Vampire Diaries,
Mhm.
but one thing that they did, which I still am trying to cross my head around,
Mhm.
um, they said for the longest time that you can't be a vampire and you can't be a witch at the same together. It has to be one
Mhm.
or the other. You can't be magical but also be supernatural.
Right. I
Um,
remember that.
and then I get really deep into the series, and what's the next thing that they do? You have people that are vampires and mages. You have mages that are siphons that can now siphon magical energy, and then as much as I have been enjoying Legacies, I love it. I mean, again, I love everything about this
World.
mythology
Yeah.
in this world. But it's like I've gotten to the point in Legacies where we're following Klaus's daughter, and we already know the thing about Klaus, right? What's Klaus? He's a vampire and he's a werewolf.
That's right.
But his daughter is not only a vampire, not only a werewolf, but she's also a I want to say mage because of my mythology, but
Uh-huh.
she's a witch,
Uh-huh.
and the whole story is about the fact that you know this is Klaus's daughter. She's a tribrid, which again is not possible. It's definitely not possible, but it's possible. Um, and she has her powers as a werewolf. She can transform at will. She has her powers as a witch, so you can use magic. But the one thing that I liked about the series is that she couldn't be use her vampire powers,
Mhm.
and I was trying to figure out why for the longest time. But in this mythology, it was more or less like because she hasn't died, she hasn't unlocked her full potential. So
Mhm.
now she's got to die to unlock her full potential.
Oh
And
my
I'm thinking
goodness.
to myself, I'm like, this is a
Yeah.
plot hole.
Yeah.
This is a
Make it make
massive
sense.
plot hole.
Yeah. Well, it's like on like the old soap operas when a character who like 14 seasons ago was unable to conceive, all of a sudden they have a baby. And
Right.
it's like they literally hope that the audiences have changed or they forgot or they're not really paying attention. Like there are writers that do that. They just hope that nobody notices. And it's like in the age of TV and reading today, and there's a lot of reading going on in the indie publishing scene, by the way, people, with a lot of dedicated fans and authors that are constantly promoting and cross promoting and all that. That's what we do. Um, You know, you do occasionally come across people that are like, plot hole. And it's like, no, audiences today pay attention.
Yeah, they'll call you out for it too, which is hilarious. But
Yeah, I mean, we're far past the days of there's only 3 shows on TV, so nobody's going to care because they can only watch those 3 shows. No, now it's if I don't like something, I'm canceling that and I'm picking up something new, you know? Like,
yeah, exactly. It's just one of those things where you just got to make sure you're refining your craft and that you're actually making things matter.
I mean, the biggest offender for me, the greatest offender of killing off characters and bringing them back and destroying your own lore beyond repair and coming up with silly reasons why you can still do what you want to do. The biggest offender for me to this day will always be Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah,
I tell you, when I even get to the games leading up to Kingdom Hearts 3, my one and only question is, so what is death exactly? Because there's a whole lot of dead people just popping out of holes in the ground, like Gimli describes dwarves in Lord of the Rings. Like, what is actually
they
going
just
on here?
sprout out and fall to the ground.
Yeah. I mean, all of a sudden, all these characters are back. I'm like, didn't I kill all of you? What the what?
They just come back. It's like there's no explanation either. They just come back.
No, absolutely
We
none.
just
It
all
was
meet up here in the
Keyblade
Keyblade
Graveyard. Yeah.
graveyard, and
Yeah.
yeah, we're here again. Surprise.
Oh my lord. Yeah. It just it blows my mind. It blows my mind that people can just like cash in on nostalgia and get away with stuff like that. But that's a whole other discussion. What are some other pro tips for killing characters?
Pro tips for killing characters. Well, we
Hmm.
talked about meaning, making sure that it makes sense that you kill a character. Make sure that their death actually makes sense.
Yep.
I think that's a really important one. Um, it's got to make sense within the realm of your scope. Um, if your person's getting killed by a vampire, make sure that it's supernatural.
Mm,
If getting killed by a superhuman serial killer, make sure that the superhuman serial killer does something superhuman
mm.
and serial kills that person.
Right.
Um, make sure that you're following the rules within your world because, again, pro tip, you want to make sure that you're making things believable as well as
Yeah.
making meaning.
Yeah, and also like if you're writing, so my first series is the Meridian trilogy, right? Your series is Sanguinary series. My next series is the Calipar. Your next series is Auto Realm. It's like if you're giving them Meridian, give them Meridian. If you're giving them Sanguinary, give them Sanguinary, right? Like we should see some magic. We should see some supernatural. You know, you're absolutely right. Like one of the beautiful things about writing mythologies is that we can play with tools in those stories that we might not get to play with in other projects at all. And we
Right.
should do so as much as possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I had in this detective series I want to write, I had this idea to do the whole detective visits the prison thing, but he's kind of, he's part robot. So Carrie and I were talking, and I was like, I feel like we could probably do a thing with like hacking into a computer mainframe and maybe placing a call because it's like we should play to the character's unique qualities, right? You know?
Yeah, that's the thing that makes a story meaningful. If you're doing little instances like that people will pick up on, then that's what characters are remembering. Like you talked earlier about how I was using the crow. Well, the
Hmm.
crow is a calling card for a particular character, unnamed, of course. You got to read to find out who the character is. But if
Hmm.
you know anything about mythology and know what the crow signifies, then you can probably guess what mythology it belongs to and why. Um, but I mean, that's the thing. You need to use things that make sense. In book one of the Sanguinary series, I introduced Apep, and the interesting thing about Apep is whatever he swallows is erased from existence.
Hmm.
So, what was one detail that I added to that story? As Apep got closer, Christina couldn't use her powers.
Mm.
She found that her powers were nullified
Very clever.
by the inside of Apep.
Hmm.
So, like, that's a small little innocent detail that you add to that particular world, and it goes a long way in the long run because people will read that and be like, "Ah, I got it right there." You know, if
Yep,
I read a vampire story and we're still building up to the point where you are revealed to that the romance lover is a vampire, you're going to hear things like, "Oh, well, on the radio today, somebody was just killed
yep,
in Washington Lake Park, and they were drained of blood
yep,
and they were decapitated." You're
that's
not
right.
gonna think that it's a ghost that killed him, you're gonna think
That's
it's a
right.
vampire, but those little subtle hints it
Yeah,
goes a long way.
breadcrumbs, absolutely. Um, it's Yeah, very interesting you say that because that kind of brings us to the point of one of my big things that we talked about on the episode tonight when it comes to killing characters is that it shouldn't just happen, right? It shouldn't be, oh, hey, it's you. Oh, bye, you're dead. Like, without saying, of course, that it's going to happen, there should be a proper buildup to a character being killed off. It should be like a moment that feels like the story led to consequently, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, killing off characters just because is never a good thing.
No. There was a moment in Game of Thrones, right? Game of Thrones is probably like the patron saint of killing off characters at this point. I think they were tied with Walking Dead for a while, but honestly, I think a couple years they actually beat them like badly in terms of just how many people they coldly slaughtered on in the books and in the show. But what always struck me was that despite the quantity of characters that were going, it always felt like the story was driving us there. And it was always a consequence of the larger story. And it made sense. Cut to season 6 when they decided to just start writing characters off because they had to end this show in a couple of years. It was just, for me, it was such a noticeable difference. I was like, y'all just done decided to kill that character last week. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, you could tell when something is split second and not like decided upon. And sometimes I'll give them credit. Sometimes it has to do with contracts expiring
Yep.
or a person not returning. Like, for example, Rick, when he left The Walking Dead, he wasn't
Mhm.
meant to go, but his contract was up and he didn't want to renew. He wanted to go and spend time with his family. So, what did they have to do? They had to get rid of Rick,
Mhm.
which
Right,
nobody wanted.
right. And I mean, the same thing happened with Dale, spoiler alert. There was some behind the scene stuff going on there. You actually brought that to my attention at the time that just caused them to have to write a scenario into that episode. Interestingly enough, though, um, if the crew you're working with is good, if the writer writing the book is good, it was sudden and unexpected that I can't remember his name, that he was leaving the show. But they did manage to work in some decent foreshadowing to it throughout those last couple episodes. So it's like they still had that, passion for, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, you could say the opposite about like how Shane went, and like
Oh.
Shane, the actor who plays Shane, he's gone public, talking about it in other interviews where he's like, "I wanted this to happen."
Mhm.
Like Rick, the character who plays Rick, Andrew Lincoln, and I, but like we were talking about like this is how we want Shane to go, and they
Mhm.
were like, "No, no, we want you to do this," and they're like, "All right, we'll do it," but I think it would have been much better if I did this.
Right.
And,
Right.
like, he
Yeah,
outlined how he wanted his character to go, and it made much more sense, but the writer won in that circumstance, but,
sure.
you can get on one hand a really good, death that makes sense, and also get a really bad one that, it was okay, but it could have been
Yeah.
better.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's the remarkable thing about how you write and how a lot of our contacts and friends in this little circle write is that, there's a saying in Hollywood, best idea wins. But oftentimes, you don't get best idea wins. Oftentimes you get the directors and writers are going to overrule everybody. They're going to stick with what they wanted to do. But I feel like when you write, the best idea does win. Like the characters lead. And if the editor says something interesting, you tend to lean in that direction. And how important would you say that is when it comes to making these big story decisions?
It you gotta listen to your characters and you gotta see what is going on. Um, like um, for me, I knew that I needed to go a particular direction with book two, and I knew that I couldn't have as many characters involved in the climax of book two,
Mm.
and I had to go and think of a way to do that. And I think I struggled a great deal coming up with the solution. But then when I found the solution, it actually made a lot of sense.
Hmm.
And
Sure did.
it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, I know this is how I need it to be. How am I going to get there? And it's got to make sense, and it's got to flow properly, and people need to be excited about the direction that it goes.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. This is awesome. It's awesome to talk to you about this, because for so long it was a conversation about what you were going to do, and like, like the mechanics of it and the logistics of it and just the existential crisis of it all. You know what I mean? And now we're just talking about it as something that's been done and has been done exceptionally well. I mean, how awesome is it looking at that book cover? Let's talk about it again.
Yeah, the book cover is fantastic. It's beautiful. They followed my directions to a T. It has everything that I want on it. I can't complain about it.
Yep.
Like I said, the only thing that the book one is missing is that one, but you don't
Ah,
really need
yes.
it.
Absolutely.
Um, book one looks great. Book two looks better. Um, yeah, what do
Book
you say
3.
about it?
Yeah,
It's
book
a
3 will look
beautiful,
even
beautiful cover.
better. I mean, I'm just so, over the moon about it. We're coming up on the last 8 minutes here. Um, I do want to transition into offering you the chance for me. I'd be happy to take the lead on this since I love reading live, but I'd love to offer you the chance for Dirge of the Trinity to be read live a little bit tonight if you'd be interested in that. But first, I want to ask you, is there anything else you want to add about? It could be about killing characters, it could be about pushing that book through and making your dreams come true. It could be about cover design. Is there anything else you're really dying to get out?
Yeah, I guess I should really talk about this term that I like to stick with nowadays. It's called persistence.
Mm.
It's a word that I have written and I have on my work computer on a sticky note. Persistence underlined, and persistence is a word that I have gravitated towards, especially in the last 3 years. That despite everything, you got to keep pushing forward. And the most important thing for me was realizing that my biggest issue was getting in my own way. And I think I edited myself as I was writing too much. I took on too much, and it really forced me to struggle writing book two until I was able to pull it together and sort of write the book that I was looking for. But then again, persistence, always keep going. Um, things might suck now, but down the line, when you figure things out, it won't suck anymore. So persistence and everything. That's kind of the word of the day.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. And I encourage everybody out there to really take that to heart because, Andrew and I both, he's been there with Dirge. I've been there with Children of Arc. We've had our moments more than once where we were just like, you know what? I don't know if I can do this. I think I might be done. I don't think this is going to work. We've had those moments. It's human nature, it's part of life. And when you get to the other side of that with exactly what Andrew said, persistence, you realize that, you know, your dreams are within reach. So I just want to encourage everybody listening. And Andrew, thank you for encouraging everybody listening. Do you have any closing remarks?
Buy Dirge of the Trinity on Amazon. It's
I,
fourteen
Dirge of the
ninety nine
Trinity.
for your paperback and $3.99 for your ebook.
14.99 paperback, 3.99 ebook. Folks, let's get these book sales going and please write us authors reviews. We need reviews in order for more people to see the books. Thank you so much. We are going to be right back in a moment with to leave you with a live reading of Dirge of the Trinity. But before that, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the show this evening. We really
Thank-
appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, we will be right back. Thank you for watching Drop a Line.
Met her in my dreams, she was my queen. A castle in the mountaintops, rivers and streams. Plucking sunlight from the sky in my pocket. Give it to you later on in the form of a locket.
Thank you for watching Drop a Line. We are back with a quick live reading almost said sanguinary song. Some host I am. Dirge of the Trinity, Book 2 by Mr. Andrew Bast. This is going to be a real quick reading. Hopefully it whets your appetite. Here we go. Daniela leapt to her feet, but the crow did not move. Slowly, Daniela moved towards the window, the crow carefully watching her. To her surprise, it allowed her to get close enough for her to touch. That was when she had seen it. It was faint, but it was there. A rune was embedded into the iris of the crow. The symbol glowed lightly, flaring up as the crow took a breath. Christina is dead, Daniela reminded herself. She pinched her arm and slapped her face, but she did not wake. This was not a dream. Yet here the crow sat with a rune inside of it that felt like her. She'd seen it first on the fence, then in her dream, and now it was visiting her in her room. Christina was dead, but she was the only medium among the living and the only one who studied with runes. This can't be Christina, she told herself. Yet she couldn't think of anyone else besides Christina who could have sent this message to her. Do you understand me? Daniela offered, feeling stupid as the words came out. She let out a shaky laugh and muttered, Maybe the coven was right. Maybe I'm not fit still, because here I am talking to a bird. Then the crow cawed. It flailed its wings for a moment before resting calmly back on the windowsill. It was a sign. The creature understood. Take me to your master, Daniela said eagerly. Take me to the one who sent you. Take me to her. The crow cawed and gave her a light nod. The crow then took flight, taking off out the window and landing on the lawn, waiting for Daniela to follow. All right, just following a crow in the middle of the night in a foreign country, Daniela mumbled nervously as she carefully climbed out the window. What could go wrong? Daniela carefully climbed down the mansion wall until her feet touched the ground below. When she turned, the crow had taken flight, and Daniela followed. The crow led her to an underground tunnel around the back of the mansion, covered by brush just at the foot of the hill. The crow settled on the branch, squawking until Daniela cleared the branches covering the passageway. Daniela closed her eyes and attempted to sense what was ahead, but just like in the mansion, Daniela could not pick up any energy. No doubt, this passageway was also protected by the druid and their runes. The raven pressed forward, entering the tunnel. Daniela sighed and followed. The tunnels appeared to be old, built with cracked and aged stone. Moss hung in between the cracks. Some care had gone into taking care of the passageway as braces appeared around the corners of tone that looked most damaged. Thin lights rounded the corners of the room, illuminating the way forward. At the end of the hall, Daniela came across two druids. They were both laying on their backs, the crow sitting between them, looking back at her. The crow's eyes carried an emerald glow, a rune appearing. Daniela approached the druids, bending down to check their pulse. They were alive, but under some kind of trance. That was when she noticed that the druid's eyes reflected the rune embedded inside the crow's eyes. The same color energy vented from the druid's eyes, surrounding them with an emerald aura. Whoever controlled the crow appeared to want to keep Daniela hidden and keep the druids alive, perhaps to earn her trust. The stone stairs led into a narrow passageway lit by oil lanterns, leading down to the base of the chamber. There, at the foot of the stairs, the chamber opened up to a pit in the ground surrounded by druids. Daniela moved towards the edge of the pit and looked down. In the center was a glowing blue rune. The rune split into 4 colorful paths that ran up the wall of the hole and up towards the supervising druids positioned at the top of the pit. Standing in set locations that lined up with the paths, the druids were funneling energy into the chamber. The runes on their skin glowed in conjunction with the floor rune. Daniela examined the positioned druids. Their aura was fading and quickly replenishing. Their energia was running into a protective seal. Christ, it's like an energia farm, Daniela thought as she crouched down to keep herself hidden. These druids are powering that chamber, and from the looks of it, the energia it took to operate the seal was very confusing. Several of the druids' runes used the magic within them to charge the device. One thing she had learned from working with druids was that the tattooed seals held temporary charges. It remained active so long as the energia inside sustained the spell. These runes weren't glowing full of energia. Instead, they were all dim and fading. The druids were spent and they were tired. Daniela looked back for the crow, but it was nowhere to be found. That, folks, is Dirge of the Trinity. If you want to know what happens next, you got to get the book. We're going to bring the author back on for a quick minute. How was that read?
Awesome. I always like hearing you read.
Thank you very much. And good chapter to pick, right?
Yeah, very good chapter. I was wondering which one you were going to pick.
Oh, yeah, folks. If you want to find out what happens next, go ahead and buy Dirge of the Trinity today on Amazon. And with that, we wish you a good night, good morning, good afternoon, and good night. That's what I wanted to say. Andrew, take care, buddy.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Pen Night Radio. To hear more about how we expand on this topic, I invite you to check out previous episodes of the podcast and send your own thoughts to Alec Pangea Author on Instagram Threads, or Alec Pangea Drop-A-Line /The Calipar Fans on Facebook. Stay engaged with the podcast for your chance to appear as a guest and talking partner during a future episode that tackles your favorite topic. With all that said, it's time to go out to battle. Knights, right on.